From unsolved mysteries to unexplained phenomena, from comedy gold to relationship fails, Amazon Music's got the most ad-free top podcasts, included with Prime. Because the only thing that should interrupt your listening is, well, nothing. Download the Amazon Music app today.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Scott Fox After 9. Today's episode is going to be a little bit shorter, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I realize the limitations of what I'm dealing with as far as a potential audience is concerned today. You likely saw by now, Pierre Poilievre is going to be on the Joe Rogan Experience. I got to tell you, this is something that I told you last week was likely going to happen, and I'm really, really happy that it came together. I think this is good for Joe. I think it's good for Americans to hear a Canadian perspective, and I think it's good for Pierre Poilievre. But I'm also aware there's a lot of people already that are crapping all over this before they've even heard the interview. I know there's a lot of people who are excited to hear this, and that's why I'm going to keep my episode fairly short today, because I know that people want to hear it. So I'm going to step out of the way for a fellow podcaster, someone that I like a lot, Joe Rogan, and I want you to hear what Pierre Poilievre has to say on this interview. Now, maybe you're asking, well, why would people crap all over it if they haven't even heard it yet? Good question. Here's the thing. There are some people who are afraid this interview is going to make Pierre Poilievre look very, very good to a Canadian audience, and they think it's going to influence the electorate. Now, those are mainly people on the left, and maybe they've got a point. Joe Rogan has a massive audience. In fact, when you add up all of the different viewers that the mainstream media in Canada has, and in particular, I'm talking about the CBC, CTV, and what have you, Joe Rogan's got a bigger audience. Pierre Poilievre, in a way, could almost reach more people leaving Canada than he could being here in Canada. I also think there's a lot of folks that realize when Pierre does go on CTV and CBC, they're not exactly kind to him. They don't throw the softball questions to Pierre like they do with other politicians that they like a little bit more. So Pierre's going to go on Joe Rogan today, and he is going to answer questions about his plan for Canada-U.S. relations, how he sees the country, and things like that. And I think that's great. I'm very curious to hear Pierre in that format because Joe is very, very casual. The way he does a podcast, it's very easy to listen to. It's like a couple of people talking. And I think that that's good because I want to know more about what makes him tick. I want to know more about the man. And I think that that's going to come out in this Joe Rogan interview. Now, I also want to point out there's people who are not looking forward to this interview because they think that Joe Rogan is MAGA. They think Joe Rogan is far right. I just want to try and correct that premise there because I don't think that that's true. I think that Joe is actually quite centrist. The problem is the center has moved so far to the left that people who were always in the center are now considered far right. And that's just not an accurate depiction. Joe is very much a centrist. In fact, at one point, he identified as a Democrat. But again, the left moved the center very far left, leaving many of us that were in the center, I guess, on the right. There are people who say I'm far right. And if you listen to this podcast regularly, I'm sure you know that there's nothing further from the truth. Yes, I'm on the right. I have conservative values, but it doesn't change the fact that I can still look at an issue objectively. And I think Joe is the same. Joe has had some fallings out with President Trump recently. You know, there was a point when Joe and Trump seemed like they were very tight. Joe's been very critical of President Trump because of his position on Iran and because he feels the U.S. is getting too close to Israel. Hey, you can feel however you want to feel about Joe's political leanings. I'm just happy that Canada finally has a voice in America. One of the things that has been very apparent since this trade war with America started is that we need more people in Canada to help get the Americans on the Canadian side. Because when there's Americans that are siding with Canada, that puts a lot of pressure on Donald Trump. Pierre going right to the source, to someone who has the president's ear, Joe Rogan. I think that's a best case scenario for Canada, assuming he doesn't bomb this interview, and there's no reason to think that he did. We'll find out when the episode drops. If Pierre Poilievre can make a compelling case to Joe Rogan and to Joe Rogan's audience, who in fairness do tend to be on the right, I think that's a best case scenario. That puts pressure on the U.S. administration to try and work out a deal with Canada. Pierre has been proposing a lot of things lately, including a new policy for an auto pact, creating a strategic reserve for precious minerals and resources. Pierre wants to build pipelines. He wants energy security for across North America, all things that I think the Americans want. The problem is us Canadians haven't been able to get a deal done. The chief negotiator, Mark Carney, isn't even going to America. He doesn't talk to the president very often, it seems. And when they do talk, it seems like trade's not on the radar. So I think that this is a best case scenario for Canada. I think whether you are left or right, it doesn't matter. We need strong voices from Canada advocating for Canada in America. And I hope that by the time all this is said and done, that results in a much stronger relationship between Canada and the U.S. We haven't had any luck with the way we've been going. It's been a year now. We were promised a deal in July. Then it was pushed back to August. In November, it looked like we might have a deal, and then that got blown up too. We've made no progress, but there's a lot of Canadians losing their jobs. So many of them, it is crazy. Some of that has to do with tariffs. Some of that has to do with internal policy here in Canada. Let's keep in mind, a lot of the issues that Canada faces now, we were dealing with long before Donald Trump got reelected. We need to keep that in mind, but we also need to keep in mind a deal with America is in the best interest of Canada. We need to get a deal done. And if Pierre Poilievre can advance that cause, I think everybody, again, left or right, I think everybody should be cheering Pierre on because he's actually doing something. And Joe Rogan does have the ear of the president. You know, if Joe Rogan is putting a lot of pressure on Donald Trump and he's taking his right-leaning audience and also applying that pressure to Donald Trump, I think that makes Donald Trump much more likely to get a deal done. Let's not crap all over this idea until we've actually heard the interview and we see where it goes. Hey, maybe Donald Trump is going to be outraged that Pierre Poilievre was on, but I don't think he will. I think this is going to lead to, and I may end up regretting these words, I think this is the beginning of the end. I think this is the beginning of getting a deal done with the Americans after a year of basically no progress. So again, I know there's a lot of people who want to listen to that episode, and I encourage you to do it. I think it's good for Canada. I think it's good for Pierre. I think it's good for Joe Rogan. I think it's good for North America. I'm going to keep this episode short so that you can hear that. Right now, I am, let's see here, it is just after 10 o'clock. Toronto time. I'll get this done probably in half an hour or less, and then feel free to listen to Joe. I also want to let you know that I'm aware that Joe does a long podcast. Every episode is really long, and some people don't have time to listen to the whole thing. So what I'm going to do is, after the interview drops, I'm going to have a curated collection of clips that I can share with you here on Scott Fox After 9. So if you just want the Coles notes, if you just want to hear the good stuff, check back in. I don't know if it'll be tomorrow. That's going to be a listener DMs episode. It might come out on the weekend. It might come out early next week. But if you don't have time to listen to all of Pierre on Joe, I understand. I still think you should listen to Joe. I like him a lot. But I'll try and give you the Coles notes right here. Now let's jump into today's episode. I want to start off today by playing for you a couple of things related to America. And I don't do that every day here on the pod, but every now and again, I feel like something newsworthy happens that you should hear. Right now, the U.S. seems to be testing the allies. The U.S. is part of NATO. NATO is supposed to support fellow NATO countries. And the U.S., even though they didn't consult NATO, in fairness, they didn't ask the allies about going into Iran. But now that they're in, the U.S. would like a little bit of help trying to clear the Strait of Hormuz, which I've heard way more about in the last week or so than I think I have in my entire life combined. But as it turns out, that's a pretty vital shipping route, and a lot of oil goes through there. Because the Iranians weren't letting ships through, that has led to a backlog of oil tankers. That means the market doesn't have as much oil in it, and that's why prices are going up as crazy as they are. Now, there is a solution. The U.S. says they need help to try and clear the Strait of Hormuz, and they've asked the NATO allies to go in and do it. So far, every one of the quote-unquote allies, including Canada, has said we're not getting involved. We don't want any part of this. Okay, I guess that's probably a tough pill for the Iranians to swallow because I still think the Iranian people want to be free. So what are we going to do here when the U.S. is doing everything they can, along with Israel, to deal with the Iranian regime that is still clinging to power? But we need more manpower to go and clear that Strait of Hormuz. We need the NATO allies to step up and help out. Well, they've said they won't. So what I want to play for you is a couple of clips right now from the Director General of NATO, or the Secretary General, Mark Rutte. Mark has made a couple of comments over the last couple of days because one of the things Mark is worried about, and I don't blame him, is that if Donald Trump doesn't get help from the NATO allies on this, he may pull America out of NATO. Well, Secretary General Rutte sees that as a clear and present danger for NATO. Listen to this.
So when President Trump is doing good stuff, I will praise him. And I don't mind him publishing text messages. And if anyone thinks here, again, that the European Union or Europe as a whole can defend itself without the US, keep on dreaming. You can't. We can't. We need each other. And why do we need each other? I tell you. First of all, because also the US needs NATO. And the US is not only in NATO to prevent a mistake after the First World War, not to re-engage with Europe. And then again, the long arm of history reaching out to the US again in the Second World War, as Churchill famously said in his speech in 1941 in the US Congress. They are also in NATO because for the US to stay safe, and by the way, Arctic region is evidence here, they need a secure Arctic, they need a secure Euro-Atlantic, and they also need to secure Europe. So the US has every interest in NATO as much as Canada and the European NATO allies. But for Europe, if you really want to go it alone, and those of you who are planning for that, forget that you can ever get there with 5%. It will be 10%. You have to build up your own nuclear capability. That costs billions and billions of euros. You will lose then, in that scenario, you would lose the ultimate guarantor of our freedom, which is the US nuclear umbrella. Good luck.
Very sobering words there from the Secretary General of NATO. He is laying it on the line in front of the NATO allies' faces, around the table telling them, we need the U.S. We need the protection of the U.S. nuclear umbrella. He was very, very emphatic there that NATO has got to support fellow NATO members, whether they were consulted in advance or not. Here's one more. He is over in Europe right now, and he was observing some exercises. And this is only about 25 seconds long, but this adds a little bit more to what he was just saying.
Of the ballistic missiles, of the nuclear capability is severely degraded. When it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, I've been in contact with many allies. We all agree, of course, that strait has to open up again. And what I know is that allies are working together, discussing how to do that. What is the best way to do it? They're working on that collectively to find a way forward.
Okay, he says NATO is starting to get the message, and maybe we will see some NATO participation over in the Middle East. Frankly, I think they need it, but I also don't understand the problem as they're presenting it. The U.S. has got more than enough firepower over there to probably clear the strait on their own. I think this really is a test of friendship, a test of the alliance. I think Trump wants to know who his friends are and who is not his friend. And, you know, he's commented in the past, these European leaders in particular, they're so nice to him, to his face. They're kissing his butt left, right, and center. And then they go back to their country and they start talking smack again. He doesn't like that. Are they going to get involved or not? Well, as I understand it, part of the problem there in the Strait of Hormuz is, number one, the Iranians may have placed underwater landmines. Somebody's got to go in and clear those. The other issue is it's a fairly narrow body of water. It's only like 30 kilometers wide or something like that at its most narrow point. And I may not even be 100% accurate on that, but it is narrow. So part of the problem here is any idiot with a shoulder fire rocket launcher could take out an oil tanker that's got $500 million worth of oil in it. And that's not good news either. It's not enough to just have ships escort these tankers through the strait. There's got to be more to deal with the people that could or might not be on the shore. How do they do that? Well, you could do it with ground troops, but I don't think Trump's all that interested in putting boots on the ground in Iran. I don't think he wants to do it. He could use the attack helicopters, and the U.S. has got a lot of them. Apache helicopters, Black Hawk helicopters. Those I would have thought would have been a no-brainer. Just have helicopters going up and down the coast, and if anything moves, shoot it. That might be a solution as well, but again, this is probably something that the NATO allies should get involved in. Do I want Canada to get involved? Frankly, I don't think Canada can get involved. I don't think we've got the capability, and I don't think we have the munitions either. We gave a lot of what we did have to Ukraine. And frankly, I just don't think the Canadian military is in any position to help right now. But that's not to say other countries couldn't get involved and help. And I hope that they do come to that conclusion, because get that damn strait open, get the oil flowing again, and let's get these gas prices under control. Because frankly, this is ridiculous. I think the prices have gone up way more than they needed to manage this crisis. Net 32-cent increase in 19 days in Southern Ontario. Gas went up 32 cents a liter in 19 days. It is obnoxious. While I'm talking about the Canadian military, a story broke last week and the Canadian mainstream media basically buried it. We found out through media reports that when Iran was firing missiles basically indiscriminately across the Middle East, when they were getting attacked, they attacked a Canadian forces base, or they attacked a base where there were Canadian forces resident. We didn't find out about that from our prime minister. We didn't find out about that from our defense minister, and we certainly didn't find out in short order. We found out through media reports. And when the prime minister was asked about it, his only comment was, well, I'm not the only spokesperson for the government. Just yesterday, the defense minister, David McGuinty, got asked about that comment from the prime minister. I think we should all be outraged that the Canadian government hid from the Canadian people that Canadian forces were in danger and they got attacked by another country. Here is the defense minister.
When the prime minister was asked about the airstrike, he said, quote, he was not the only spokesperson for the government, end quote. As the defense minister, does this not mean you could have been more forthcoming in telling Canadians about the situation?
Well, first of all, I was with the prime minister at the microphone when he said that in Yellowknife. And I think what he was alluding to was we were traveling. We were on our way to Norway to sign a series of new deals with the Nordic 5 countries to cooperate on military hardware, to cooperate on space. So basically, at the time, it was still something that we were processing internally. I take my lead from the operational experts inside the Canadian Armed Forces. And that's who I work with. That's the information I rely on. That's why I'm commenting on it right now.
It took 18 days for him to comment on that? Really? This aggression started on February 28th. It was almost 2 weeks before the Canadian people found out that our troops were in harm's way, and we didn't even find out from one of our officials, like the defense minister or the prime minister. We found out through media reports. Were they ever going to tell us? I don't think so. And here's the reason why, if I'm being honest. They want to stay out of this conflict because the geopolitical alliances that Canada is trying to form would find that unpopular if Canada got involved. And I think there are still patriotic Canadians out there that would be demanding a response, myself included. They attacked our troops. That deserves a response. It deserves a political response and it deserves a military response. We weren't involved. We've made it clear from the start. We're not participating. Then why was Iran attacking us? Why did they go after our soldiers? Something needs to be done here when it comes to transparency and accountability. The media can't keep letting the federal government get a pass. There's a lot of things that they need to be asked about. While I'm playing audio, I'm going to go through a couple other clips still on this U.S. situation, but only for one more. The U.S. Vice President, J.D. Vance, he was doing he was in Auburn, Michigan, and I'm not exactly sure what he was there for. Some sort of an announcement, and I assume it had to do with cars. But the topic of Canada came up. Here's what the vice president had to say.
President Trump has made some comments about trade with Canada. For manufacturers here in Michigan, that bridge will be a lifeline to get products over the border. Do you think that the president has taken the right steps with Canada in regards to the bridge, and do you think that it should open on time?
Well, the president's attitude to Canada is they are an important ally. They're an important trading partner, especially for folks in this region of our country. But Canada has taken advantage of the United States of America for far too long. And they've taken advantage of the United States in a couple of different ways. Number one, they have allowed us to subsidize their entire military, their entire security. Canada pays virtually nothing, at least until a couple of years ago, for their own security, which means we had to foot the bill for that security. Is that fair to you and your kids that you have to pay for the military of a foreign country? No. So the President of the United States said to the Canadians, number one, you guys got to take your own security more seriously. You're always going to be an ally, but why don't you have a little bit more self-sufficiency? And I think that makes complete and total sense. The second thing the President said is, if we're going to be true friends, You have to treat our workers as fairly as we've treated Canadian workers for 40 years. Again, we have let so many people over the entire time that I've been alive take advantage of the United States of America. The president said, if you're going to apply a tariff to our goods, we're going to start applying a tariff to your goods too. It's basic fairness. And that's what we've done. And our hope with Canada, and I think we'll get there eventually, is we're going to get to a point where Canada treats our workers fairly, we treat their workers fairly, and they're going to be a true ally and a true friend, not somebody who's taken advantage of us, which is what they've done for most of my life.
Okay, I mean, harsh words, and I know that there's going to be people who pick that apart and say, well, this is true and that's not accurate and blah, 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 and that's fine. But no matter how you decipher that, that's the opinion of the White House, that Canada had an obligation through NATO to maintain our military, to contribute to the defense of North America. And the way the Americans see it is under Justin Trudeau, we weren't even close to fulfilling our obligations by meeting our NATO spending targets. So by extension, we were relying on the Americans. If, God forbid, anybody ever attacked Canada, it would be the Americans who would defend us. And to a large extent, we still do to this day depend on the Americans to defend us. They're saying that's a subsidy. If they have to look after our defense and we're intentionally not spending as much as we should have been, then they're subsidizing it because they have to pick up the slack. True or not true, doesn't matter to me. But that's the perception of the White House, and that's something we've got to change. Hopefully, in the episode of Joe Rogan that Pierre Poilievre is going to be on, hopefully that comes up and hopefully he addresses that.
My name's Mackenzie, and I started a GoFundMe for the adoptive mother of a nonverbal autistic child. The mother had lost her job because she wasn't able to find adequate care for this autistic child. So she really needed some help with living expenses, paying some back bills. So I launched a GoFundMe to help support them during this crisis. And we raised about $10,000 within just a couple of months. I think that the surprising thing was by telling a clear story and just like really being very clear about what we needed, we had some really generous donations from people who were really moved by the situation that this family was struggling with.
GoFundMe is the world's #1 fundraising platform trusted by over 200 million people. Start your GoFundMe today at GoFundMe.com. That's GoFundMe.com. GoFundMe.com. This podcast is supported by GoFundMe.
Let's keep going with audio today. One of the hot topics around the world, one of the things that many countries are discussing in their mainstream media is what the hell is going on with Canada, specifically MAID. That is medical assistance in dying. Yesterday, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith was doing a news conference. A CBC reporter wanted to ask her about her position on MAID. Listen to this.
My follow-up, this legislation includes things such as practitioners can't bring MAID up unless a patient does themselves. There's the ban on the public display of MAID information in healthcare settings. Do you not trust that Albertans and practitioners can make the right decision for themselves?
Well, I'm watching as the international community is looking at what's happening in Alberta, and I would just, encourage you to look at some of the stories that have been written in The Spectator and The Guardian, where they're pretty appalled that those who are living in poverty, those whose only circumstances seem to be managing mental challenges of dealing with a chronic condition, are being advised that MAID's an option. And when we see that kind of international criticism saying this is really outside the norm, we have to take that seriously. I think, as the doctor said, that is certainly not all practitioners who are doing that. But when we read stories about a young man repeatedly refused MAID for his mental health condition in Ontario, able to fly across the country to BC and find an amenable doctor for it, we're concerned about that. When we hear of Veterans Affairs officials counseling and encouraging people with PTSD to consider MAID, these are things we want to stop. We don't want anyone to be counseled to end their life prematurely if they do not have a terminal illness. And if we have to make that clear in law, we'll make it clear in law. And I think it's because of those stories that we keep reading about that we think it is time for government to act.
Well said by Premier Danielle Smith. And you know what? That is true. Around the world, people are asking, what the hell is going on in Canada? I decided to pull the latest MAID numbers just so that you know exactly how many people are dying because of MAID. MAID was created for those who have a terminal illness and no real options available. Well, the program has kind of spidered out a little bit, and now through stories that are being reported, we're hearing little things like doctors are actually recommending or suggesting to people that that's an option for them when they don't necessarily have a critical illness or when not all options have been exhausted. So let's talk about this. MAID became legal in Canada 10 years ago in 2016. 2016 through 2024. 76,475 Canadians died from MAID. That was just in the first 8 years. It's really ramped up, though. Canada's now on track to go over 100,000 total MAID deaths in 2026 if the current trend continues. That's 45 Canadians a day that are getting medical assistance in dying. 45 of them a day. 5.1% of all deaths in Canada are from MAID. Roughly 1 in 20. We've got to look at this program. I believe in it. I think it was created for the right reasons, but sometimes things get a little out of control, and we can't allow it to get out of control when 45 Canadians a day are dying from something like MAID. You know, while I'm doing Premier stuff, that was Alberta Premier Danielle Smith that I played a second ago. Let's do a couple of other premiers. It's budget time. A lot of provinces are trying to figure out their finances, and all I can conclude from what I've seen so far is we've elected a lot of premiers that are bad at math and not very good with our money, because they're all running massive deficits, even provinces where I didn't expect it. See, in New Brunswick, I expected a deficit. They changed governments not that long ago. The new premier, not very good at math, terrible with money, it seems, because they're running a massive deficit now. One of the provinces that I thought would be a little better with money was Saskatchewan. But as it turns out, Saskatchewan is probably going to be in a pretty bad situation financially as well. It's too bad because I like this guy, but here is Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe.
Tomorrow, your Saskatchewan Party government will present the new provincial budget. Now, it's no secret that the finances of provinces across Canada have taken a hit due to President Trump's tariffs. Saskatchewan is no exception. The good news is this, that we are better positioned than most provinces to deal with the U.S. tariffs. We have the strongest economy in Canada. Most of what we export to the U.S. remains tariff-free, and we are expanding our markets to other countries all around the world. We are in a strong position, but we are not immune. Tariffs and economic turmoil, they have impacted our finances. So we had a choice: raise taxes and cut services, or protect Saskatchewan. We chose to protect Saskatchewan. We will protect Saskatchewan families by keeping life affordable and lowering taxes. We will protect and improve our healthcare system with our new Patients First healthcare plan to ensure that everyone gets the right care in the right place at the right time. We are not going to do what the NDP government in BC did. Use this as an excuse to break their election promises, raise taxes, and still run a $13 billion deficit. Saskatchewan will find its way through the current instability, and we will come out stronger than ever. But for now, your government has made the choice to protect Saskatchewan.
Protect Saskatchewan. People in Ontario think that sounds familiar, right? Because we do Protect Ontario. And just so you know, it's nothing more than a marketing slogan. It doesn't mean anything. There was Scott Moe setting everybody up for a pretty dire financial situation in his province, and the reality is simple. He blamed it on Donald Trump and the tariffs. That was what he blamed it on. But in the same video, like less than a minute later, he also said, we have the best deal with the Americans. It doesn't add up. This trade spat with the Americans cannot be an excuse for our governments to run up massive deficits unchecked and then just wash their hands of it and say, oh, it's Donald Trump. That was the reason it happened. That is wrong. We need to protect ourselves in the situation we're in by being responsible with money. And frankly, I don't know that all of the premiers are. Speaking of premiers, yesterday, Ontario Premier Doug Ford weighed in on a situation that we actually discussed yesterday on the pod. Anna Almeida was my special guest, and we were talking about a bunch of different issues. One of them was a home invasion that happened in Vaughan, Ontario. That's just north of Toronto. 3 thugs broke into a house in the middle of the night, and they picked the wrong house. The owner was a legal firearm owner, and he started shooting. One of the suspects got shot in the leg. He got dropped off at the hospital by his accomplices, and then they took off. They weren't going to go in and wait. He has now been arrested and is facing multiple charges. He's going to be fine, but he did get shot by the homeowner. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who is embroiled in so many scandals right now and trying desperately to reset the narrative. He does not want people talking about the records that he does not want to turn over to the public, not the least of which his cell phone records. He does not want those to be public, even though the courts have ordered that he release those records. He's doing some unpopular stuff, including trying to outlaw certain freedom of information requests. And people, regular people, not even media types, regular people realize that that is not transparent. That is wrong. So Doug is trying to get people fired up and on his side. He's trying to distract them with other things. And he decided that home invasion in Vaughan, that was a good one for him to jump on the horse and start beating the drum.
As for the person that was defending his family, he was a legal gun owner, was stored properly, congratulations. Yeah, I'm glad you shot the guy. Teach us the rest of these robbers, and I encourage everyone out there that's a legal gun owner. Someone's going to come in and try to kill you and kill your family. Remember, it was just last week, Jamie, one guy got shot because he was trying to protect his kids. Well, you know, these guys, they need to be shot, as far as I'm concerned. You're coming through the front door to hurt your family. I'll never forget the one family that the man was protecting his 4-year-old kid, and his child, I should say, and there was 3 other children there and his wife, and they assassinated him right in front of his kids. Like, these ruthless, like, they need to rot in jail for the rest of their lives. Congratulations for shooting this guy. Should have shot him a couple more times, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, I think, by and large, if I'm reading the room right, most people would agree with that. Yeah, they're scum. They tried to break in. They should have got shot. Listen, it's totally okay for you to think that. It's totally okay for me to think that. It's not okay for the premier to say, you should have shot him a couple more times. He's going to put somebody in a dangerous situation legally. Somebody probably would have been charged if they had done that. This person used the appropriate amount of defense, the threat got eliminated, and bam, that's the end of it. Again, I agree with the sentiment. We're all angry about the violent crime, but frankly, that's Ontario in 2026, Mr. Premier. We live in a very dangerous place. I don't know that the premier should be encouraging people to start shooting. Hey, listen, we all have to follow the law. And right now, the law is a little ambiguous about how much force you can use to defend yourself. Clearly, the police didn't think anything egregious happened here because they didn't charge the homeowner. Okay, great. That's good. But if he had escalated it more, he very well could have been charged. I really don't think that that is the appropriate person in Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario, to do that. And frankly, I don't think he's doing that because he believes it. I think he's doing it, again, to try and distract from, in any way possible, from all the scandals that he's dealing with. Latest opinion polls are out ranking the premiers. Doug Ford is second last. The only premier who's less popular in his province is Francois Legault from Quebec. Number 1 in popularity, Wab Kinew in Manitoba. Last thing I'm going to play for you to wrap up this episode. Yesterday, the Bank of Canada made an interest rate announcement. They're leaving the rate the same. Here is that son of a bitch, Tiff Macklem.
The Canadian economy continues to face heightened uncertainty related to U.S. trade policy and geopolitical risks. Now the war in Iran has added a new layer of uncertainty. Its impact on the global and Canadian economies will depend on how long the conflict lasts and the extent to which it spreads across the Middle East. Inflation in Canada has been close to the 2% target for more than a year now. But as we've seen, the war in Iran is causing oil prices to move sharply higher, and this will push inflation up in the near term. Canada's economy is dealing with a lot, and we now face more volatility. The Bank of Canada's role is to be a source of stability. We're supporting economic activity while ensuring that a jump in energy prices doesn't turn into persistent inflation. So let me expand on what we've seen in the economy since we published our January monetary policy report and what we see ahead. Recent data show the Canadian economy remains in excess supply and is growing slowly as it adjusts to U.S. tariffs and uncertainty. After growing 2.4% in the third quarter of last year, GDP shrank by 0.6% in the fourth quarter. This was weaker than we forecast at the time of the January MPR, but that's mainly because inventories were drawn down more than we expected. Domestic demand actually grew by 2.4% because of the strength in consumer and government spending, although housing was weak. Data received for early 2026 suggests the economy is expanding again, but at a slower pace than we had forecast in January. The labor market remains soft. The job gains we saw late last year were largely reversed in the first 2 months of 2026, and the unemployment rate rose to 6.7% in February. Recent trade data have been volatile, but they suggest growing weakness in exports.
Sounds pretty bleak, doesn't it? Sounds really dire. Here's the thing. For those who don't know, the Bank of Canada, what they do is whenever inflation gets too high, and Tiff Macklem did say it's been near the target, like 2% for about a year now. That should mean rates are coming down, but he didn't lower them. Now he's got an excuse to keep them high because gas prices are high. But what the Bank of Canada does to try and control inflation, what they'll do is they'll suck as much money out of the pockets of middle-class Canadians as they can. And the theory is if we don't have any money, we can't go out and buy things. And when we aren't buying things, prices will come down. It sounds completely ridiculous. I know. If you don't know what the policy is, that's exactly what it is. They raise interest rates to take more money out of your pocket so that you don't have any spending power. And when businesses start to struggle, they lower their prices. It is completely ridiculous that anyone with a straight face could look at Canadians and say, well, that's how we have to control inflation. But they're going to do it again. They might even raise interest rates next month. Why would they do that? Because gas prices are going to raise inflation. But here's the thing. We all know, everybody knows exactly why gas prices are going up. It's because of a conflict in the Middle East. Now, whether we do or don't have any money to spend in our domestic economy, those gas prices are going to continue to go up. And that's a global factor that has nothing to do with Canada, essentially, because we aren't using our own oil. With the Bank of Canada knowing that whether we do or don't have any money, it is not going to impact global oil prices, would they still raise interest rates knowing how bad unemployment is, knowing how soft our economy is, and knowing how desperate the middle class is? Would they actually do that? They might, everybody, and it is wrong, and I want to get that on your radar right now, that's what they're thinking of doing. They're going to use gas prices to raise interest rates, and if they do, I don't even want to think of what's going to happen to the middle class. I don't even want to think about it because they are stretched to the max as it is, and tens of thousands of people have lost their job. It would be reckless to raise interest rates next month. We don't obviously know what they're going to do, but they're certainly giving indications that they might. And God help them if they do, because I think it's going to get ugly on the streets in Canada. And I'm not trying to be a pessimist here. That's just the way I see it going. When the economy is bad, crime thrives. That's when it goes completely out of control. When people are broke, they turn to crime. I think it's going to get really bad. Really bad if they try and raise those rates. Friends, enjoy Pierre Poilievre on the Joe Rogan Experience. And again, congrats, Joe. I'm glad you guys made that work out. Have a great time. I'm sure Joe's going to be very popular in Canada over the next couple of days as people dip into that episode. I'll catch you right back here tomorrow with a listener DMs episode of Scott Fox After 9. And today I'll leave you with the sounds of Pat James and The Whole Truth. Hey now.